Or 6 o'clock, or 6 hours. I didn't know Mr. Brazan could be that enthusiastic. Yeah. So, yeah. So before this meeting degenerates into how much time we have, call it to order. A number of us, including the Minister and General Eyre, were at the Sam Sharp dinner this morning. And it was a deeply moving event, and I just thought I'd give the minister a minute or two to reflect on that event, and then we'll launch into your 5 minutes of presentation. So, Minister, do you have a word or two?
Mr. Chair, members of the Standing Committee on National Defence, I am very pleased to be here with you today. To begin, in terms of the Sam Sharp breakfast this morning, this was my second year in attendance as Minister of National Defence, and it is the 10th anniversary of the Sam Sharp breakfast. And Aaron O'Toole and Romeo Dallaire need to be thanked for their service in terms not only of our country, but also in terms of memorializing the legacy of Sam Sharp and his service to Canada during the First World War. And in particular, Sam Sharp did incredible work on the battlefield in leading his troops, including at Passchendaele. But when he returned home to Montreal, he actually committed suicide. And that fact speaks volumes to the work that we need to continue to do to address mental health issues and concerns. And as MP Aaron O'Toole explained this morning, his legacy, Sam Sharp's legacy, was really hidden for a very long time until a bust was erected and this breakfast was started. And in terms of my own personal reflections, I kind of go back to when I was young, and mental health and discussions about mental health, the study of mental health, was not on the agenda, either in school, in our activities, or even at home around the dinner table. In fact, mental health, I believe, probably was addressed by your parents telling you to go outside and play or do some sports or something like that. In other words, we have come a long way in the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of ensuring that there are supports available 24/7 to those who need supports via hotline or other organizations. And we work closely with Veterans Affairs Canada for the establishment and perpetuation of these supports. And I don't want for a moment to give the impression that we're resting on these programs as though they are sufficient. I think that we need to keep ensuring that every member of our armed forces is protected and respected when they put on a uniform in service of this country. And part of that includes ensuring that mental health issues are addressed and can be addressed by the members themselves should they choose to seek assistance. So I'll just say more work to be done, but a very meaningful moment for all of us around the table. And as I said this morning, one of the most impactful things about the Sam Sharp breakfast is that we leave politics at the door, and it is all of us in a room pulling in the same direction for the safety and security of families and troops and veterans, as well as specifically stressing the importance of their mental health. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me an opportunity to express my feelings.
Thank you, Minister. We now look forward to your 5-minute statement.
So I said that I'm pleased to join you today, and in particular, I understand that what we're going to be doing today is receiving questions on the main estimates for D&D, the Armed Forces, and the Communication Security Establishment. To be clear, we are at a pivotal moment in our institutions. Across the globe, we have seen authoritarianism take hold and to emerge with a new vigor. Let's take a look at Russia, where we are continuing to see its full-scale, brutal, and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. A people who want nothing more than to live in peace and security. China, also a disruptive regional and global power, increasingly disregarding international rules and norms, including in the Asia-Pacific vis-à-vis our RCAF pilots and crews. Dans ce monde en constante évolution,
in this changing world, we must double down on our efforts to protect our country and its people, while continuing to support our allies and partners. The roughly $26.5 billion we are requesting for D&D and the Canadian Armed Forces, including $1.7 billion in statutory authorities. This will enable us to sustain our current operations while putting us on track to meet our international obligations for years to come.
breaking them down in terms of the numbers. Of the total funding requested for national defense, almost $18 billion is allocated to our operating expenditures. Ce financement nous permet de
This funding sustains day-to-day operations, as I've mentioned. These are everyday ones, including, of course, supporting our people and by ensuring their operational readiness, as well as keeping our equipment and facilities in good shape. The complete funding is aimed at funding these programs, which include day-to-day operating expenses along with smaller capital investments.
remaining funding for D&D includes $319.8 million in grants and contributions, transfer payments to other orders of government, international organizations, individuals, and third parties. $46.7 million towards the long-term disability and life insurance plan for forces members, for example, and almost $6.1 billion in capital expenditures, those being longer-term investments in our military capabilities. Now, throughout this estimates process, what we're doing is providing funding for several specific initiatives, and you have heard me discuss these a number of times at committee. In fact, our NORAD modernization plan, the North Warning System, the IMIT modernization program, Canadian Forces Healthcare, and culture change in the Canadian Armed Forces. And this is a broad range of investments, Mr. Chair. That is why you are seeing the amount of requests in the main estimates, and that is why you will continue to see us work to help protect our country in an era of uncertainty and instability. We do recognize that we need to keep moving forward. We need to do this quickly, but we also need to be deliberate and systematic about it. In terms of our defense policy, of course, you know that the governing policy is strong, secure, engaged. So the expenditures that we are putting forward are under our defense policy put forward in 2017. At the same time, we are undertaking a defense policy update, and we are making sure that we are taking into account the new and emerging threat environment, including in the area of cyber and including because of emerging global conflict, including in Ukraine. Throughout our defense policy expenditures under strong, secure, engaged, you are seeing our defense expenditures increase by 70% over the 9-year period beginning in 2017. We recognize that we have more work to do, but I want to be clear that our defense spending is on an upward trajectory. In the meantime, the funding requests that I'm putting forward today will enable us to deliver on our critical commitments. It will allow us to sustain our military as we begin to chart a course forward in the short, medium, and long term with the defense policy update. And I so look forward to discussing these plans with you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Bazan, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister Anand, for being with us, and General Eyre, and everyone at the end of the table. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate your comments about the Sam Sharp breakfast. Very well attended. One of the best ones that I've been at over the last decade. And I, too, want to extend my thanks to both retired Senator Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, as well as soon-to-be retired colleague, the Honorable Aaron O'Toole, retired Captain of the Air Force, for their work, and looking forward to seeing it being handed off to two of our colleagues, in retired Admiral Rebecca Patterson, who's now a senator, as well as our colleague in the House of Commons, Alex Ruff, a retired colonel. I know they'll continue on with the great tradition of honoring our military and those in service and their families, as well as all our first responders and police officers out there who are suffering with mental health and operational stress injuries. Minister, just wanted to first start off with the crisis in Sudan. As it was reported yesterday in the paper, your government, the Liberal government, seems to have a habit when it came to Afghanistan and now in Sudan that you're the last ones in and the first ones out. As Professor Christian Leppert said, we simply don't have the capacities, we don't have the people, or we don't have the political will. Which is it?
Thank you for the comments, Mr. Chair, my honourable colleague. I don't agree with the comments that were made in that regard. In fact, we put 6 flights into the Wadi Sedna airport and we removed 550 people. We also ensured the evacuation of our diplomats with the coordination with our allies.
There's still 230 Canadians left behind that we need to get as well. And if we started earlier, we may have been able to get them before things degraded even worse.
The clarification there is that there are approximately 200 Canadians still asking for help. That is being quickly and expeditiously monitored by Global Affairs Canada, and there's still a number of options for exiting the country through the port of Sudan. As we know, the commercial flights are still leaving there. We have 2 ships in the harbour, and we also have Canadian Armed Forces, Global Affairs Canada in the region.
Thank you. I just only got 6 minutes, so I want to switch gears a bit and get back to the estimates. Last year, you said on TV that you're going to personally bring forward aggressive options that would see Canada potentially exceed the 2% level, hit the 2% level, or come in below the 2% level. Based upon NATO numbers, this year we're sliding from 1.34% of GDP down to 1.29%. And in this, in your last expenditures, if I looked at lapsed spending, you would even make your predecessor blush in that you lapsed $2.5 billion in military spending. How did that happen? And I thought you were committed to getting us to the 2%. Is it because Prime Minister Trudeau has told our allies that we'll never get there?
Well, there are many parts to this question, so let me start with defense spending itself. I already indicated how we are increasing our defense spending by 70% under Strong, Secure, Engaged. In addition, we committed $8 billion under Budget 2022, and in addition to that, we have committed almost $40 billion for NORAD modernization and continental defense. So my point there is that our defense spending is on an incline, and that is unlike the Conservatives who let defense spending fall below 1% while they were in power.
So I just want to remind the Minister that when we were government, we had Afghanistan and wrap up, so there wasn't the cash outflow after we came home. Secondly, we did get all the kit bought that we needed to, new C-17s, new Hercs, new Leopard tanks, new Chinook helicopters, like we got stuff done. And we didn't commit to the 2% until 2014, and we had a 10-year plan to get to 10%. Now you're seeing spending lapse under your watch by $2.5 billion, so you can go out there and make a bunch of promises, but if you don't deliver, and that's what last year was about, was not delivering, how are we ever going to get to our NATO standard at 2% when you're allowing $2.5 billion lapse in 1 year?
I beg to differ in terms of not providing results. We have Arctic offshore patrol ships, for example, in the water, one of which has circumnavigated the North American continent, and we have signed, unlike the previous government, a contract for the provision of 88 F-35s for the RCAF. But to get to the point about lapsed
Which I do thank you for buying after the Prime Minister said he'd never buy them. I
Point
think
of
it was
order.
actually a very, very good purchase.
I suspect that the
Can I
point
get
of
to the
order
lapsed
is to
funding
let the
answer?
minister answer the question. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair point of order. So let me give you a minute and 15
Just
seconds
on lapsed
to
funding?
answer the questions.
On lapsed funding, I agree. We need to spend allocated funding, and we need to get projects out the door. I believe strongly in the fact that with the allocated funding, under the envelopes that I have already identified in my response, that our department needs to continue to put their shoulders to the wheel in terms of procurements and make sure that we are delivering on the items that have been contemplated already in strong, secure, engaged, and in NORAD modernization, and that's what we are working very hard to do.
So, Minister, based upon the Pentagon papers that were released on the Discord app, it said in there that the Prime Minister told NATO that we'll never hit the NATO target of 2%. And this has strained our relationship with our allies, particularly in NATO and in the United States. Can you comment on how that is impacting upon your ability to do your job as the Canadian Minister of National Defence at the NATO table?
Very briefly, please.
Our commitment to NATO has been strong as a founding member and will continue to be strong. We are recognized as a leading country in NATO and in terms of aid to Ukraine by the Secretary General as well as the Defense Minister to Ukraine and President Zelensky himself. In terms of NATO and our allies, we meet monthly around the table of the Defense Contact Group. That's NATO countries and at least 20 more countries. The feeling in the room is unified and one relating to collective action for Ukraine and for European security.
We're going to have to leave it there.
So the alliance is strong and Canada's contribution is also strong. Thank you.
Mr. Sousa, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for attending and also acknowledging the fact that over the last number of years, there has been increased spending, there has been increased modernization, and increased understanding and awareness of the requirement to modernize our supports, increasing in their operations, as well as enhancing and improving our cultural aspects of the armed forces. So I commend you on those two counts. My question is in regards to, well, let's start with the health and investments made by the Canadian Armed Forces. In regard, and you can appreciate we're talking a lot about health in our committees now, in regards to what it means, particularly for women, and advancing the workplace and safety of the environment. If you can comment on those aspects.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question of my honorable colleague. I want to say that from the very moment I was appointed, my top priority has been to address issues relating to culture in the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure that we are building an institution where everyone in our country feels welcome, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their sexual orientation, and disability. The key is that institutional change takes time. But what we are doing is ensuring that we have a plan. That's why in December 2022, I accepted all 48 recommendations of Madame Arbour and set forward a roadmap for the implementation of those recommendations. And that was somewhat unprecedented in terms of the way in which our government responds to reports, because what I wanted to do is to say to the House of Commons, we're serious about this and this is our plan. In terms of allocated spending, in budget 2022, we announced $144 million over 5 years and $31 million ongoing to expand health services, to expand physical fitness programs, to be more responsive to women and gender diverse members. And we're continuing to advance initiatives to meet clinical, occupational, and deployment needs. As a racialized woman myself, I want to stress that I feel very deeply about issues relating to discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, inclusivity, and diversity. Now, some people may call that woke. For me, it's just my actual everyday life. And I will continue working on that with my team, with the Chief of Defense Staff, with the Deputy Minister for as long as it takes, because this is crucial. We are modernizing the Canadian Armed Forces. We are making sure everybody feels welcome. It's going to take time, but we have a plan. Thank you.
There are some items in these estimates that also makes reference to the purchase of the next generation of firefighter jets. And just wondering if you could provide some detail as to how these funds are necessarily being used.
Well, first of all, I want to note that the contract that we signed is thanks to a rigorous, open, and transparent competition that this government conducted free from political interference. National Defence is seeking $19.8 million to commence implementation activities in these estimates, and F-35 deliveries will begin in 2026, and they'll support initial training that will be conducted in the United States. We have to, however, prepare for the arrival of these jets here in this country, and so we've already taken steps to prepare for the construction of fighter squadron facilities in Bagotville and in Cold Lake, which I know is good news for those bases. We're also seeking $154 million to advance construction on forces bases across this country so that we can make sure we're using the newest infrastructure, modernizing and recapitalizing existing infrastructure. One of the greatest things about the F-35s is that they're going to allow us to be interoperable with our allies. But in order for that interoperability to take hold, we have to have the technology on the ground in the bases so that we are operating at the same footing as our allies. And that's the work we are doing right now at National Defense. Thank you.
Say again?
You have a little bit more than a minute.
Perfect. Can we talk a little bit about the cultural change then? That I see a lot of effort in regards to our infrastructure, and they're doing great procurement. We're advancing the cause with other jurisdictions around the world. We're trying to ensure that we stay ahead or at least maintain strong presence, collaboration. How is that collaboration happening with inside and the cultural? Because we've had some challenges there, and since you've been there, some great positive things have been happening. So can you clarify a little bit about that?
So, as I mentioned, institutional change of this sort is difficult but not impossible. But what is required is collaboration from leadership, which we have here around the table and throughout the organization, so that we're all pulling in the same direction. It is not enough for the Minister of National Defense to say that she's against discrimination and in favor of inclusivity and diversity. What needs to happen is at all levels, throughout our country, we need to ensure that we are all on the same page to modernize the Canadian Armed Forces. One of my priorities as Minister of National Defense is to visit bases across this country and to speak with forces members themselves and to hear what it is that they care about and what do they want. And more often than not, especially women on those bases will pull me aside, whisper in my ear, and say, "Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing on culture change." Those aren't the people who are in the media every day. Those are the people who are seeing meaningful change on the ground. And to all forces members who are working so hard to reform this institution, I want to say thank you.
Okay,
And to all forces members who see the need for this change, I want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Souza. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Minister, General Eyre, and all of the members present. So before I come to my first question, I'd like to say this. I think we have consensus around the table as to the support we need to provide to Ukraine. We understand that when demands come in, we are able to fulfill them. However, it might be legitimate to question how these requests are accepted. And I would like to revisit the issue of the 200 light armored vehicles that was sent following to La Rochelle without a call for tender. First of all, we wondered as to the fact that the contract was signed before a call for proposals. Apparently, there might have been financial pressure, some bribery, because there was no tender process. But perhaps we would have a lower cost contract. There's an increase of some 35% in cost to acquire the La Rochelle Senators. So I'd like to hear you speak to that, because at the time the answer we received when we asked the question why there was no tendering process, it's because it was requested by the Resnikov Defense Ministry in Ukraine to obtain these particular tanks, knowing that President Zelensky was threatening to fire Zelensnikov because of some allusions to possible collusion. Should the Department of Defense review its criteria when it grants a contract following a request submitted by Ukraine?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. First of all, it's important to recall that the war and military assistance to Ukraine is urgent. It is now that this military assistance is needed, and that is why Minister Reznikov asked me for specific equipment for Ukraine, including the armored vehicles. And this is the outcome of a conversation with the Ukrainian government, and there were also letters sent from the Ukrainian government to obtain this necessary equipment. Because the most important thing is to ensure that Ukraine has the equipment that it needs at that point. But at the same time, it's important to ensure the integrity of the contract. We will always be there to safeguard the integrity of our contracts. This means that we need to apply due diligence. We need to have a solid process in place before we supply the contracts. And we will continue to support Ukraine consistent with our legislation. Madam Minister, if I may, unfortunately, I think we can expect that this conflict will continue to last and that increasing need will be expressed by Ukraine. And I know I'm repeating my question, but I'm rephrasing it. Would the only criterion, once and again, be Ukraine's request, whereas we know on a post-exterior basis that collusion was there. So there is a risk that there might be more. And we did not reach out to the rest of the industry to see whether or not there might be a similar product. And the increase in price of 35%, $100,000 per tank, is that representative of reality when you compare this to producers who supply similar products in our industry? So it's the same question. Will this always be the only criterion, that is when it is a request by Ukraine with respect to the supplying of military equipment? I'd like to raise 2 points. First of all, we have started an audit and inspection of all the accounts and registers, and to also ensure that we have grounds for justifying the contracts underway. And secondly, no, this collusion was never approved. The decision was taken to extend complete production while we proceed with an audit. So it's important to recall that we, of course, have a process in place. And we need to confirm the integrity of all of our contracts and of all of the suppliers who have a contract with the Government of Canada. In the future, I would like to discuss the process, of course, if You have suppliers in your riding, of course. Myself and my department, of course, would be happy to have a conversations with them. Because you're right. Perhaps this is a war that will last for quite a while. So we need to ensure that all of our suppliers have the opportunity to share in the economic spin-offs. Well, very quickly, but the problem is that suppliers were not aware of the fact that there was a need because there was no tendering process. From what I understand, the minister opened to us reviewing some accelerated tendering process to meet with their request rather than simply moving on the basis of an individual basis.
Each and every time is to ensure that we get high quality equipment in the hands of the Ukrainian armed forces while ensuring integrity of contracting within the bounds of our law.
Madam Normandine, 6 minutes. Ms. Manson.
Thank you, Minister, General, and officials for coming today. I appreciate your time. I wanted to ask, so in the 2017 United Nations Peacekeeping Defense Ministerial Conference, the government promised 200-member quick reaction force by March 2020. That's now been pushed back twice, and so now we're looking at a deadline of March 2026. The United Nations, in order to be able to plan, to be able to do what they need to do, they need to know that they can rely upon those people from Canada, those peacekeepers, something that Canadians have come to identify with in terms of our contributions around the world, and that international community is reliant upon that. So I would like to know how you are going to ensure that we meet that new recent timeline.
Start off by saying, first of all, thank you for the question, and we are committing to support it. We are committed to supporting peace and stability and security, and that's why we have a range of support for peace operations around the world. In fact, Canada is one of the top 10 financial contributors to the United Nations peacekeeping operations. And what our Canadian Armed Forces are doing is providing tailored and specialized military contributions to ongoing UN peace support operations, including in the area of training on the role of women peacekeepers in UN operations. And we've recently renewed our commitment to provide tactical airlift support to UN peace operations in Africa. In terms of the question, we are continuing to look for ways to contribute to UN operations, and I will ask General Eyre if he has anything further on the question.
Oh, thank you, Minister. And Mr. Chair, with respect to a quick reaction force, we have to remember that a quick reaction force is only employed when the situation is very bad. And so it has to be prepared to fight. And so before we put a 200-person quick reaction force anywhere, we need to make sure the enablers are in place that go around that. So the casualty evacuation, the intelligence, the fire support, the line of communication logistics that is required to ensure that that element is set up for success. I've been on a mission where that was not in place, a UN peacekeeping mission where we ended up being overmatched by one of the sides, and we had some pretty intense combat because we were put into a situation where we did not have those enablers. So we have to make sure that wherever we send Canadian troops, that we give them the tools that are necessary.
No one would deny that we want our people to be ready for what they have to go into, absolutely. But then why would you set a deadline of March 2022 or March 2022, and then another deadline that was missed, and now 2026 when you weren't able to meet them in the first place?
So what Canada does is to regularly engage with UN officials to assess where and when a quick reaction force may be required. And any deployment of a QRF would be following a specific decision by the Government of Canada to do so in support of a specific UN mission within clearly defined parameters, building on Chief of Defense Staff's comments just now. So it is an iterative process of examining the global situation and the requests that we are receiving from the United Nations and understanding our other missions and operations in the same context.
All right, I'm going to switch gears. We've been waiting for you to come for a while, so I have a lot of questions. So, of course, I'm happy to see that a tentative deal has been reached with the PSAC, and that was a long time coming. But there are these workers that are working for the Union of National Defense Employees. They're serving and supporting our troops. They're doing essential work for the Department of National Defense. Can you tell us, Minister, how many times you've met directly with the Union of National Defense Employees since becoming the minister?
I will ask my deputy minister to take all questions relating to the strike, but I will say that I am extremely pleased that a negotiated solution was found so that we can continue doing the important work to serve the population of our country.
I'm glad, but my direct question was how many times you've met directly yourself with the union of that works for DND.
I have not had the opportunity, but would welcome it.
Can you explain why, in the entire time that you've been minister, you have not once met with the union?
As I said, I would welcome an opportunity to meet with them.
Could you provide an explanation, like why you haven't met with them yet? It's been quite a while. One would expect that one of the first things, one of the people that you would meet with first off would be the president of such a large group of people who work right and directly under you that serve our troops, correct?
So thank you for the question. I meet with a large range of stakeholders, including defense employees, and I'll continue to be welcoming and have my open door policy for those meetings.
But the union themselves, they vote on a president, their representative, just like the people in your riding vote for you as their representative. So don't you think that it would be important in order to build those relations, in order to understand what those employees are dealing with? A lot has been said about, sexual misconduct and some of the issues that employees within defense itself and the department deal with as well, not just within the CAF, that you would want to hear about those issues directly from their main representative, the president of that union.
I most definitely
That may be an important question.
do want to hear
however,
from them.
the time
And I
is
have
up.
met with hundreds of employees across our
I take
country.
note that the minister has to leave. I think we can get in a full round. So, Madame Cramp-Newman, 5 minutes.
Thank you to the Minister General and to the officials. Thank you for coming. My first question, a letter signed by 60 of Canada's top former military leaders have stated the recent federal budget was largely a summary of previous announcements without any acknowledgement that the government must accelerate spending and make significant additional funding available to address the long-standing deficiencies. Given the multi-partisanship and the genuine concern expressed with this letter, Minister, how are you going to ensure the budget allocates the necessary funding to deal with the existing deficiencies?
I thank my honorable colleague for the question, and I agree that we need to continue to examine our spending and how we are ensuring that allocated spending gets out the door on the one hand, and allocating additional spending to new and emerging threats. And on that latter point, what we are undertaking now is a defense policy update. And what is driving that update are the current and future needs of the Canadian Armed Forces in the current threat environment, which has changed since 2017 and our defense policy of strong, secure, engaged. The war in Ukraine, unjustifiable, illegal by Russia, is just one example. Cyber threats is another example. The increasing tensions in the Indo-Pacific, another example. All of these global situations are ones that did not necessarily exist in the same way in 2017 when we put forth our strong, secure, engaged policy. And so the defense policy update, where we are consulting with hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders, is part of the next phase of growing the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you for that. The next question is, the CDA Institute stated that even our critical Five Eyes relationship required that we invest sufficiently to earn our seat at the table. Given the emergence of AUKUS, is Canada being left out of the conversation and intelligence sharing networks with our allies?
Canada has very strong relationships with our Five Eyes allies. On a range of topics, I meet regularly with those Five Eyes allies, in particular on issues relating to intelligence sharing, relating to providing military aid to Ukraine, relating to our cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Our close friends and Five Eyes allies, in terms of a partnership, remain very strong. And through our Indo-Pacific strategy, for example, we're investing approximately $500 million in 4 defense initiatives to boost our military presence in the region. Through NORAD, we are working very closely with the United States. And as I said, I am in frequent contact with our Five Eyes counterparts. We will continue to work with them to keep Canadians safe.
So, with regards to the United States, former Canadian ambassador to NATO, Carrie Buck, has been quoted emphasizing the impact that shortfalls have on Canada's international reputation and our reputation with our U.S. partners. So, in concert with what you were just suggesting, can you speak to the continued reliance on the U.S. and the international tensions that are continuing to rise? Is Canada prepared to not only defend itself, but to actually be an effective partner with the United States?
Well, thank you for the question, and most definitely, yes. We are partnering very closely with the United States on NORAD modernization and continental defense. For example, almost $40 billion that we as a government have put on the table for modernizing our continental defense. And part and parcel of that process is my strong relationship with Secretary Austin. But all the way through our teams in defense, we are seeing a very close working relationship. This was emphasized by President Biden when he visited the House of Commons, for example, and it was also emphasized and underlined recently when we cooperated under the binational command of NORAD regarding the suspected balloons. This is work we'll continue to do together with the United States.
Perfect. Thank you for that. But you suggested the additional spending. It's always additional spending and additional announcements. But going back to that open letter that I spoke to earlier, it talks of years of restraint, cost-cutting, downsizing, deferred investments have meant that Canada's defense capabilities have atrophied. How is the feedback being received, and are officials changing the operations and approach taken by the ministry?
Again, asking a question, though, the 15 seconds left is never going to get us through this agenda. So 5 minutes, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here with your team. And thank you for coming out to Nova Scotia. I know you love getting back home, to you and your associate minister there. We had an opportunity, as you know, to visit the Defense Research and Development Command, the DRDC. And I think about the way that they partner with the private sector. You know, they partner with industry. And so many of the partners that they're using there at the DRDC are located right in Dartmouth Coal Harbour. And many of them are Canadian focused as well. We've heard an awful lot at this committee that new and emerging technologies are challenging the security environment, that we need to invest to keep pace and to adjust to the threats of these technologies, while also ensuring that we're working with industry to develop our own capacity in Canada. Can you walk us through how national defense is working to address these challenges?
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned DRDC because it actually ties into the last question that was asked in terms of Five Eyes allies. At DRDC last week, that's Defense Research and Development Canada, we discussed projects that DRDC is undertaking with Five Eyes allies in terms of research, in terms of subsurface capabilities, in terms of intelligence gathering. With our Five Eyes allies, the chief of the CSE, Carolyn Xavier, is here today. And every single day, she and her team are in touch with our Five Eyes allies. This is an ongoing and very strong relationship in terms of our Five Eyes partners, and we witnessed it at DRDC last week again. Now, in terms of your question relating to ensuring that we are technologically advancing, I want to stress that we will continue to work with industry to develop our own capacity in Canada. We know that the pace of technological development is presenting new security challenges, as your question suggests, and we are continually making sure that we can take advantage of and defend against emerging defense capabilities and threats. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of the types of things we're undertaking to ensure that we are ready, that we are maintaining the priority of innovation in terms of advancing the defense agenda. For example, in main estimates, we are requesting $19 million to fund research in areas critical to future defense and security needs. We're also requesting $5 million in grant money that's going to be used for contest prizes, including things like advancing robotics and integrated systems for relocatable temporary camps. We have programs called Ideas and Minds, and these programs stimulate innovation by bringing solutions from the community at large back to D&D to enhance defense capabilities. And in addition, we're requesting $2.25 million in contribution money to support ongoing collaboration with multidisciplinary networks of experts in addressing key policy issues of the day. All of that in response to your question, that innovation, technological development in conjunction with industry and the greatest minds in our country is a top priority for us.
It's interesting also, we talked about the techies, the young people coming up with the, all those skills, possibly helping with retention and recruiting down the road. Minister, I'm interested in your thoughts on the importance of investing in our naval capabilities. This morning I met with shipbuilders from Uniform Marine Worker Local 1, and I have to tell you, the sense of pride in the room was absolutely incredible. They're just so proud to be providing ships for Canada's military, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I want to give a quick shout-out as well to both Adams and Shannon, actual shipbuilders that visited me today in Ottawa, and again, they're so proud of what they do for the Canadian government. Some thoughts on the investment in our naval capabilities?
30 seconds, please.
Well, I'm so glad you asked the question, Mr. Chair, primarily because this is the 100th anniversary of the Naval Reserve this year, and we should definitely be celebrating Canada's naval contributions and certainly Nova Scotia's naval contributions as well. In terms of shipbuilding, we are seeing market success in terms of the projects that are occurring under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. I want to point to the Arctic offshore patrol ships. For example, in these estimates, we're requesting $345 million to continue construction of the 3 remaining ships. What that means is that there are 3 ships in the water, and they are incredibly important in terms of maintaining a naval presence. We are also requesting funding for the Canadian surface combatants, 15 ships, to support shipyard and other infrastructure initiatives.
Okay. We're going to have to, unfortunately, have to leave it there. 2.5 minutes, Madame Normandine.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to come back to procurement. Minister, you mentioned that emergency may be a reason for a party-to-party contract, but it does not justify replacing the CP Auroras. Apparently, this project was not supposed to be put in place for 2027-28 for delivery in only 2032-33. My question is this: why was there no call for tender in this, call for proposal? Because recently we also realized that there were delays in production at Boeing, which seems to be the company that the government has identified to replace the fleet. Well, my question is simple: why was there no tendering process for such a large-scale project?
Premièrement, nous n'avons pas.
First of all, we have not taken a decision on that capability. So secondly, it's important to recall that we must take measures to assess this option as well as all other options in detail. And we will see, we have to ensure that Canadian Armed Forces has the necessary equipment that they require when they need to accomplish difficult tasks that we ask of them. And that is why we will examine this option. But as I've already said, we have not yet come to decision, not yet. Regarding the schedule, one of the things Bombardier is criticizing the department for is to pushing forward the schedule that it had established. As a result, it is unable to present an efficient product. Will you commit to maintaining the original schedule with at the latest delivery in 2027, 2028? First of all, we need to remember that it was thanks to ongoing undertakings with industry and our allies that we were able to identify that this is the only available replacement plane that will meet with all of the requirements. By the RAC, and I don't know.
Normandine is way beyond her time, and maybe you can work that in the second hour. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. So this committee, we just started a study on the health services provided to our armed forces and then transition. In 2017, the government signed a $1 billion deal with Calian to outsource the provision of healthcare workers in the armed forces. Now, at that time, Calian's CEO said that it was too early and that they weren't going to hire any more staff. We've repeatedly heard in this committee about the need for medical professionals to be provided to and to have doctors available to CAF members. In fact, General Eyre was at this committee talking exactly about that need to provide healthcare professionals. So in terms of this huge contract, the fact that Calian is making quite a lot of profit, taking profit away from the provision of healthcare professionals, wouldn't it be more beneficial to hire more medical professionals directly, bringing them back in-house to service our CAF?
I'm going to ask the Deputy Minister if he could take this question. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. 2 points here. It's a blended approach. So, yes, there's a contract with Calian, and yes, there are contracted resources for healthcare services available on bases. And they can serve two purposes. One is a stopgap where there's a shortage amongst employees. And two is a longer-term delivery model where there are no employees available in the foreseeable future. But that's not to say that there are no employees giving healthcare services on bases. They're across the country. It's a mixed model. And where where there are delays in staffing or we cannot find the appropriate qualified employees to deliver the services, Calian provides a useful backup. As you know, military members do not, use the provincial healthcare system unless there's special circumstances.
Part of the budget this year, and as well as the PSEC's recent negotiations, was a promise to cut that outsourcing by 15%. Would this be one of those deals that you would look at?
Mr. Chair, when we're looking at healthcare services, the first thing is we need the services available. Where the staff can be found, and there's an ongoing challenge in healthcare services, that is our priority, is to staff those positions. Where there are delays in staffing, absolutely we have to rely on other means to provide the services.
To hear our Arctic patrol ships that we ordered when we were government are so well appreciated. Minister, you said the updated SSE is reacting to threats we face today. Now, this committee learned about threats to our Arctic, in particularly below the water surface. Can you tell us where in the estimates that this is reflected? For example, even the beginning of research into a submarine that can be used by the Canadian forces that will stay under the water longer than our diesel engines.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for this question. First of all, we do have our Victoria-class modernization project for 4 submarines contemplated in these main estimates, where we're asking for $3.3 million to enhance capabilities, conditions, and operation of subs through the mid-2030s. In addition, our Royal Canadian Navy is examining conventional options which would be available for a potential submarine replacement class, and that's going to include gathering information and conducting an analysis of submarines that would meet the requirements, some of which the honourable member outlined. Our defense policy update is currently underway. Public consultations are ongoing, and we do look forward to releasing the defense policy update in the near future.
Thank you. And given the degree we had to rely on the United States during the balloon challenges earlier this year, has Canada had any concrete progress in increasing its surveillance capabilities?
Actually, I disagree with the premise of the question that we had to rely on the United States. In fact, it was the binational command through NORAD that detected and shot down the suspected balloon over Yukon in February. In other words, it was Canada and the United States acting jointly with NORAD, NORAD doing what NORAD does best, controlling our skies.
And how close are we to getting the sensors so that we ourselves can detect when we have intrusions into our airspace?
We're continuing to work on our aerospace surveillance by maintaining the North Warning System with a contract to Nasittuq Corporation for about $600 million, as well as through NORAD modernization by establishing
when will
over the
that be up and running, Minister?
radar from a polar and an Arctic
Minister, when will
perspective.
that be up and running? How long
On
do
our
we have to wait?
website, we have outlined 19 projects that will be undertaken as part of the $38 billion that we are contemplating for NORAD modernization. So this is a process. Establishing air surveillance systems is going to take time. And so what we're doing while establishing the new Northern Approaches surveillance system is also maintaining our North Warning System to ensure the safety and security of our skies through NORAD.
Okay, so will the Budget 2023 provide our troops with the needed materials to properly defend democracy here and abroad?
Our defense spending, as a general matter, is on an upward trajectory through various continued additions to our spending, through Budget 2022, through our defense policy in 2017, and through our NORAD modernization announced in June 2022. There are a number of envelopes on the table that have allocated money for increased defense spending. We are the 6th largest defense budget in NATO, and our defense spending is on an upward trajectory.
Okay, let's
yes,
talk about NATO.
Yes, we have more work to do, but we are doing it.
Thank you, Minister. So, with respect to reporting to the defense spending for NATO, Canada includes spending made directly to veterans, peacekeeping, humanitarian operations, the Coast Guard, and transfer payments to security agencies, both international and domestic. So those are new additions to make it look like we're actually investing more in the military than we actually are. And given that we learned that the Prime Minister has no intention of even attempting to aspire to the 2%, what's going to happen when the 2% goal becomes the floor, and it's no longer just an aspirational goal, it becomes the floor at which we're supposed to be spending on defense from the beginning?
So I think it's important to remember that we can't simply place large sums of money in front of the Department of National Defense without a plan for the spending of that money. And the work we're doing with the Defense Policy Update is just that, to establish a plan to ensure that we are allocating funding to the needs that we have from a defense perspective. That's what we did in 2017 as well, to make sure that we are putting funding where the threat needs exist. And that's what I want to stress to you all, that what we are doing at Defense is looking at allocated funding, but also why it was allocated. And we need, as the previous question suggested, we need to get money out the door that has already been allocated to us, either in SSE or in NORAD modernization. That's the work we've got to do.
We're going to have to leave the answer
as well
there.
as in the defense policy
Thank
update.
you. Ms. O'Connell, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, could I ask, I think I've been here for an hour and I do have to go, so could you let me know?
We're running to 5:10 or 10 to 5. So yeah, after Ms. O'Connell, it's over.
Thank you.
For all of us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here as well with your team. I wanted to actually follow up on the 2% spending because earlier in the questioning you were actually cut off. So you mentioned just now about the plan that is necessary. Obviously, it's not about just hitting a goal of 2%. It's actually making sure that the investments at the end of the day with Canadian taxpayers' dollars are going to investments to support CAF, to support our defense here and around the world. So you started to mention in response to Mr. Bazin that the previous government had spent less than 1%. But he suggested that there was, some plan to get there. However, that's not the case, and you can't rewrite history that if 2%, as Ms. Galland has pointed out, might be the floor, they couldn't even get to 1%. So can you perhaps finish your answer before you were cut off?
Well, thank you for the question. I want to start where you ended, which is, make no mistake, when the Conservatives were in power, defense spending dipped below 1%. That's a fact. And under our government, we are continuing to increase defense spending by 70% under Strong, Secure, Engaged over a 9-year period. $8 billion in budget 2022, $38 billion under NORAD modernization. Mr. Chair, those are tangible additions to our defense spending. Our defense spending is on an upward trajectory, and we will continue to do the work necessary to spend allocated funding and get projects out the door. I want to point to the urgent operational requirement procurements that I announced earlier this year. We are investing in portable anti-tank missile systems, counter-uncrewed aircraft systems, and air defense systems. As we build to brigade level in Latvia, we are going to need these systems. And so we initiated the process to procure these items to enhance our capabilities there. That's what I'm talking about, ensuring that we are utilizing allocated funding for the benefit of our defense and collective defense, as well as our NATO contributions.
Thank you. And following up on that, actually, my next question was going to be about procurement. Obviously defense procurement, but we always hear procurement moves too slow. Successive governments hear that. You mentioned the fact that we actually signed contracts, so the Conservatives can talk about something they wanted to do or talked about doing, but we are actually moving forward on this work. So, sorry, Mr. Chair, I hear a lot of heckles when I'm speaking. Perhaps the members opposite can wait their turn, but Can you, Minister, talk about procurement and the plan to not only procure what CAF needs, but to actually be able to deliver on what we are procuring?
Okay, thank you so much. So, streamlined and flexible procurement is necessary for the successful and timely delivery of modern capabilities. We have more work to do to create a more efficient and a more effective procurement process. And what I have asked of my department is that we continue to do that work to make sure we are expending existing allocated funding, as well as to contemplate what might be necessary in the defense policy update in terms of human resources, because we need to grow as a Canadian Armed Forces, as well as capabilities. And so what you are seeing is deliverables from the Department of National Defense. The Arctic offshore patrol ships is an example. The signing of the contract for the 88 future fighters is an example. The procurement of urgent operational requirements that I just outlined is another example. Moving forward on the design of the Canadian Surface Combatants, another example. So these large procurements take time. They also require those individuals who have expertise in procurement. And what we are seeing is a growing need for more and more experts in procurement so that we can move multiple projects forward at the same time. And that is what the department is working on as we speak.
Thank you. That brings our first hour to a close. As you can see, Minister, your presence here is greeted with varying levels of enthusiasm. So we're going to suspend for a moment while you leave, and then so we are suspended and assuming, I want to welcome General Eyre and his colleagues. I'm assuming there's no further 5-minute statement. With that, we'll go to Mr. Kelly for the first 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad we turned this panel around quickly. The minister spoke about NORAD modernization and assured the committee that although it takes time, that we will have all of the kit we need. Will the radar sat system be replaced before the current system fails or reaches its the end of its, when it hits functional obsolescence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this stage, we are still working through options to replace radar sat, so I cannot give you a firm date on terms of when the replacement capability will be online. And also looking at other ways to mitigate in case
how many
there's any
How many years until the radar sat fails?
Can't project when a satellite will fail. We know that it's
we were
approaching
told about
its,
7 years.
We know it's approaching its useful life, and we have a date in mind, so we're planning around that date. Sometimes assets last longer than forecasted, sometimes less. So we need to be ready for
surely our policy is not just hoping that this one lasts
Excuse
longer.
me, Pat, for a sec. I think if you pulled yourself a little closer
sorry.
to the microphone, we might have everyone might hear you a little bit better.
My apologies.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm sure Mr. Kelly won't interrupt any further. So.
Well, I can't promise that because we need to have our questions answered.
Okay, so repeat your question, and then Mr. Matthews can.
No, I'll let Mr. Matthews go ahead.
So in terms of the planning is underway in terms of potential replacement, but also mitigation measures to fill the gap should the new capability not be ready when radar sat comes to the end of its useful life.
Okay, so we don't know how it's going to be replaced, but we do know that these replacements take significant lengths of time, and we do know the existing system is coming to the end of its operational life.
So what I would say in this, Mr. Chair, and it's a really important question the member is asking here because it is an important capability. There are dedicated satellites one can launch in terms of getting capability, but the satellite industry itself is also launching satellites into orbit on a daily basis. So when we look at possible mitigation measures, there's also scenarios in which we utilize satellites that are already in orbit or will be launched soon. So don't just assume that it will be a bespoke Canadian satellite that fills this gap in advance of radar sat. There's other options being examined.
Okay. On the surface combatants, how much of the funds spent to date so far on that project?
I'm not sure I can give you a quick answer to that one, Mr. Chair. We are still finalizing design, and that is almost done. But I'm looking at my colleague, Mr. Crosby. If he does not know, we can get back to you in terms of spending to date.
How much has been spent to date? That was the question. So, what's the completion date?
So in terms of providing the eventual 15 surface combatants, we are looking at the first ship to be ready early 2030s. The most important next milestone one should focus on is the finalization of design. And we are planning on low production starting in 2024. You don't jump into a program like that.
Sure. What are the funding? What's the funding in these estimates?
I just give me 1 second here, Mr. Chair. Unless Troy has or our CFO has the answer, but I have $90 million-ish in my head, but just give me a moment to confirm that.
Okay.
Troy tells me I've got it right.
All right, thank you.
Troy tells me he's going to correct me. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
I wouldn't do that, Deputy. Mr. Chair, in the estimates this year for the Canadian Surface Combatant, there's approximately $1.1 billion earmarked for ongoing acquisition of long lead items, continuation of the design, and
so
work on associated infrastructure.
Thank you for that correction. So the minister talked about the Victoria-class submarines. She said $3 million. I presume she meant $3 billion is earmarked for the modernization and operation of the Victoria-class submarines.
I think the minister may have been referring to the amounts in these estimates. The actual project itself has a rough budget of around $1 billion to modernize. So
okay, $1 billion to modernize, $3 million in these estimates.
Others may be able to give you an amount that's in these estimates. Troy says you have it right, so correct.
So these estimates have less than 1% of the amount necessary to complete that project.
Correct, Mr. Chair, because
Okay.
remember, when we're dealing with estimates, we're dealing with the forecasted spend for this year. So this is really about the pace at which industry is able to expend resources.
All right. On the Arctic Patrol ships, what's the funding in these estimates on the Arctic Patrol ships?
On the Arctic Offshore Patrol ship, there is 3 remaining ships. I will have to check. I know the total budget of this project, but I have in my head a number of about $345 million this year, Mr. Chair, and Troy again is giving thumbs up.
Okay,
So we've
well,
got
he's
2 thumbs
checking
up.
that. What's the completion date?
He's just confirmed that the 345 is correct.
Okay, good.
When you think about the AOPS, Mr. Chair, think about a rhythm of 1 ship per year. So there will be another one launched towards the end of the summer, 2023, 1 in 2024, and 1 in 2025. That will bring the 6 for National Defence, Royal Canadian Navy online, and then there are 2 follow-on ones that are being built for the Coast Guard.
Okay. How about ground-based air defense systems? What are the funding in these estimates?
Mr. Chair, at this point, the ground-based air defense is in a phase where we're developing the request for proposal, so it's essentially salaries. And we see the release of a draft invitation to qualify to industry being released
so 0
later this year.
Is that the correct? Okay.
Colleagues, it works better if you give the respondent an opportunity to catch their breath and respond. With that, I know Madame Lambropoulos will give you all kinds of time to respond to your questions.
Thank you for being with us to answer our questions today. And I guess I'm going to ask questions specifically around recruitment and retention. I'm wondering, of course, it's been a challenge for the armed forces, as it's been in industries across all industries and across the country. But I'm looking for reasons, other reasons besides the labor shortage. Sorry. Yeah, if you can tell us what are some of the main issues and challenges that you've had recruiting and retaining members of the armed forces that have to do with the culture specifically.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll take this one. And so recruiting and retention are at the top of our priority list. We're calling it reconstitution as we rebuild our numbers. The honourable member is absolutely correct. This is a very tight labour market, and like every other industry out there, we are seeing what has been called the Great Resignation as people move off to different employment. We're actually, when we're compared to our allies, we're facing many of the same challenges they are as well. And indeed, our attrition rate is lower than many of our closest allies. We're sitting. The last statistic I saw, we're sitting at 9% attrition. Normally, we're between 7 and 8%. and so we're seeing slightly elevated attrition rates. On the recruiting side, what other reasons are out there? Well, military lifestyle, for one. We have to take a look at the makeup of our country. Right now, most of our population is urban, and most of our operational bases are in rural locations. And so this poses a challenge. For example, somebody growing up in downtown Toronto and posting them to Wainwright, Alberta, that itself poses a bit of an impediment. And so we have to look at ways to incentivize movement to some of these different locations where individuals may not be inclined to go to start off with. The challenge of evolving our culture is out there as well. We need to be an organization that can attract and retain talent from all segments of Canadian society, where all members of this country can feel welcome in our ranks and can see themselves. And that work is continuing. And I've said this recently, and I'll say it here to this committee, you'll be hard-pressed to find another organization in this country that is putting as much effort into that aspect of making ourselves a better place.
So on that, the minister mentioned that there is specific funding that is funding specific initiatives, including culture change. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you have on the docket, any plans for making the armed forces more attractive to women and to members from diverse communities.
Do you want me to start? I can start, Mr. Chair. I'm sure the Chief will chime in. A couple of things worth flagging. The new approach in terms of character-based leadership assessments is being rolled out, and so there's money in these estimates for those. If you think specifically about measures to make the Canadian Armed Forces and the departments on the civilian side a more inclusive place, we have diversity advisory groups in place. We also have measures specific to women's health and also providing women more functional clothing, whether they be just for regular duty or if they're pregnant, space for nursing, etc. So all of those measures together are kind of a broad suite to make it just a more inclusive workplace.
And Mr. Chair, if I may add, so we're in the process of implementing all of the recommendations from the independent external comprehensive review. So those 48 recommendations are in progress. We are adjusting many aspects of the institution. We've recently published our new military ethos, Trusted to Serve, which many have asked what's different this time. Well, it's a values-based approach. Rise to your values, not sink to the level of regulation, and so that is being put into place. Changes in our leadership training, evolving. With the times, how we lead with a much more humble, emotionally intelligent approach, understanding the importance of inclusivity. Let's face it, as the face of our society is changing, the cookie cutter solution that we have used over decades and generations is not as applicable, and we must have a much more inclusive, individualized approach as our team members change. And so there's many, many initiatives, both top-down and, just as importantly, bottom-up from the grassroots level that are going to make this a changed, more fit-for-purpose organization.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned earlier in your first answer how we are ranking well compared to our allies, or that they're also dealing with similar issues. I'm wondering if you can give some specific examples. And in terms of the initiatives that you've just spoken of, how do we compare to our allies? Is anybody doing it better? Are there examples to follow elsewhere?
30 seconds, please.
So, Mr. Chair, we are in constant communication with our allies on sharing of best practices. In fact, there's a Five Eyes group focused on personnel, human resources issues, recruiting, retention. They meet fairly regularly. When I meet with my NATO allies, we discuss these issues. Many are watching us with much interest because they see their own reckoning coming as well. And so many of the initiatives that we have underway, all of which far too early to claim success on, they are quite curious because they need to change as well.
Madame Normandin, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to replacement that we heard just recently. So we said that the only the plane that can replace Aurora is the P-8. So I want to know is that whether this is the right time to make that decision or the initial schedule that had been planned with a definition of the project 2024, early implementation 27, 28, and then completion 2032, 33 would be sufficient. Would that not be possible then to look at alternative products? Thank you for that question. We already launched a call to obtain further information, which indicated that now it's only the P-8 that can meet with all of the requirements of the Air Force. But whether or not in the future it would be possible with time to develop something quite useful, yes, that is possible. But the question that we need to decide on is whether or not we're willing to run the risk of waiting, or would it not be better to buy something that is ready right now? But as Madam Minister already indicated, the decision has not yet taken place, but this is the debate as well. I'd like to know, as to the original schedule, which was not able to justify where we're replacing these right now. Is it because Boeing has indicated that if we don't fill their order book, there may no longer be P-8s available? Did you receive pressure by Boeing to review the government schedule? Well, with the P-8, it's an opportunity well, with them, it's possible that there will no longer be any such planes made in future. So we had to review our options, because the P-8 is an aircraft that our allies are using now. So it is an opportunity, and we will be examining our options. Just to make sure I really understood, it's because Boeing notified you that the production chain might stop if their order book is not filled. So this had a repercussion on the government's decision to move ahead its schedule? Well, not exactly. It was an opportunity. And if there are changes in the facts, we need to review our approach. And as I've already indicated, based on our research, now it is only the P-8 that complies with all of the requirements, and the government will be making a decision. Let me rephrase my question. So according to what we've heard from industry, this justifies that the government will review its schedule, which at the outset was not based on industry. Is that correct? No, as I've said, Mr. Chairman, it's a matter of constantly reviewing the situation of the industry to better inform our options, and that is what we're doing right now. So let me change topic, perhaps to echo Mrs. Lambropoulos' question, that is the labor shortage. We recently learned that members were more or less satisfied with the disappearance of the cost of living allowance, which is replaced by a housing allowance. And what we understood from the media is that a CAF said that this would mean that they would save $30 million in cost by replacing this. Is that accurate? Will CAF save $30 million with the replacement of this allowance? Mr. Chair, perhaps, if I may, I'll turn it over to my colleague who might want to add something. But both changes consist in an update. It's a policy regulatory update. This was a very old policy, and we've been conducting research for years to better inform the policies.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, because of this technical language, I will be continuing in English.
Living differential was brought in 2008, and it had not been changed since, and it was based on market differences. And in the 14 years, 15 years since that policy was brought in and last updated, there's been changes in markets, and so many were getting the benefit where others weren't. And so the housing differential was brought in to address our most vulnerable at the lower band of the pay to ensure that they could afford to live. And so we have heard many of the tens of thousands who are now collecting this benefit that they are quite content. Now, there were a number of others who were collecting this benefit, and had it been changed earlier, they would not have been in receipt of the benefits they've received over the last number of years. And so the work on this continued in terms of the exact number. Prior to this, we were authorized $110 million. We were spending above that. This moved our authorization up to $150 million, so it's actually an expansion. And our team has done the best it could within that $150 million envelope to provide that benefit where it is most needed, based on data, based on science.
Dean, 6 minutes. Ms. Madison.
I'd like an update on the progress of the implementation of Aurora's recommendations in terms of the External Comprehensive Review Implementation Committee and the Duty to Report Working Group. Can you tell us where these organizations are at in terms of the transfer of cases to civilian courts?
Okay, so 3 things in there, Mr. Chair. In terms of the review of the colleges, we are currently underway in terms of finding the people who will do that work. So stay tuned on that front. On the cases and their transfers to provinces, we have set up a Fed-Prov territorial working group that includes justice departments, policing organizations, et cetera, and we were reviewing the details in terms of how that, what are the obstacles to transferring, because it is, there's always complexities. So there's a consultation paper that has been shared, so that work continues. On the duty to report, I will have to turn to the chief for an update there.
So we're getting very close, Mr. Chair, we're getting very close on the duty to report. I believe I talked to you 2 years ago at this committee saying, well, this is something that we need to move on. Mm-hmm. I have signed off. I believe it's making its way up about addressing this and making some very fundamental changes to that policy.
Okay. I heard some previous news reports around the systemic harassment towards civilian workers on bases. PSAC, UNDE, union has spoken out about the issues, specifically in fire halls on bases. Civilian firefighters have faced a lot of barriers, and there's a lot of violence in that workplace. There's been complaints, senior leadership has been involved, and there's been enforcement about harassment policies and so on. So can you talk to us about the department's plan to work through the backlog of the workplace, those workplace-specific investigations? And General Arida asked the minister before about her meeting with the union leadership to discuss, to discuss anything, really. Can you talk to me about the last time you were in touch with the union leadership to discuss those specific workplace incidents?
A couple of thoughts here, Mr. Chair, before I turn to the chief. On the workplace, it is an integrated workplace, civilians and military members, side by side. And so when we talk about culture, we do have to talk about both in terms of those who might be behaving inappropriately and those who are the recipients of that behavior, and it can be civilian and or military. So when we do meet with union leadership at our regular meetings, we talk about workplace initiatives and education, but also the backlog or the slowness is a better way to say it in terms of responding to some of those grievances. And what I've heard when I've gone to bases and had town halls is probably not a great understanding amongst all of just how the system works. So I would flag that the first thing we have to do for all inside our department is make sure everyone is more aware of their responsibilities in terms of hearing these grievances. They're often resolved at the lower levels, but I think people have a model in mind where everything rockets up the list to the chief or myself, and it's really the vast majority can get resolved at the lower level, but we're not as good as we can be in terms of communicating the status of those grievances. So that's a frequent topic.
Sorry, it's just that a lot of the problem in terms of that backlog is that the people who are creating potentially the problems in the first place continue on in their workplace. And so those problems are continuing as the backlog is not addressed. So I didn't really hear an answer in terms of the addressing of that backlog.
Well, I would distinguish
directly by-
between, there's grievances that happen, but there's also, if it's a serious enough allegation, there's formal investigations. And so employees can take advantage of one or both of those, and they also sometimes go outside the department because there's mechanisms for recourse there. What I would say where there's a complaint launched, where I'm saying the department needs to do better, is on communicating the status of the action, whether it's a grievance or an investigation, back to the employee. If things are serious enough in terms of the workplace environment, we can remove people from the workplace. But again, that is only an option that you exercise once you've seen evidence of wrongdoing.
And Mr. Chair, to answer the specific question, so the Office of the CDS does not get terribly involved in labor relations. That being said, as the commander of the Army, I was very involved and had routine meetings with union representatives, and it was a very cordial relationship with willing or open door and a willingness to connect between those meetings if there was an issue to be addressed. Specifically, you talked about fire halls. I'm aware of one case in particular, one location, which is still undergoing resolution, so I can't speak to the details of that.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay. Ms. Cramp-Newman, 5 minutes.
Thank you. So, retention and recruitment. Let's talk post-living differential. I understand that we've needed to find some creative ways to recruit, and we certainly need some rapid political reaction. You noted that a lot of members are quite content with the changes that have been made to the post-living differential, but that's complete contrary to what I'm hearing in my office. So my question is, being in the middle of not just a recruitment crisis, but a retention crisis, did your office or Treasury Board take into account the extremely negative impact that the changes will have on retention?
So, Mr. Chair, this was a difficult decision, and it was a benefit that is needed fixing for a long time. And so we took the difficult decision of fixing that as a first step in revamping our other compensation and benefits that are in dire need of updating. And so more to come on this. But as I travel around the country and talk to our members, indeed, I'm also thanked for bringing in for the tens of thousands who are now getting a benefit who truly needed it. Now, given the nature of some of these negotiations that are ongoing, we are limited in what can be communicated beforehand because they are subject to
Fair enough.
being protected.
Do you think that you could commit to reestablishing the benefits to those CAF members that are losing out on the new CFHD, perhaps some sort of grandfathering clause?
I think on this question, Mr. Chair, this isn't something that we can commit to. Don't have that authority. This is something that requires engagement with other departments. So can't say anything.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Next question: why does the CFHD ignore the cost of living when calculating the benefits?
So, Mr. Chair, as the team looked at options to deal with this, the overall cost of goods was roughly the same across the country. Now there's pockets of difference, but the main differentiator is housing, and so that was the fundamental change of going to a housing differential, and it's based on 25% of a member's salary. Maximum 25%, and anything over that towards housing would be reimbursed based on a certain size of accommodation. And so those calculations, we're going back every couple of years to update the rate based on changing market conditions as well. And so that is a difference between that and between the new HD housing differential and the former post-living differential.
So could you elaborate on that with regards to the 7-year limit on CFHD? Because it's also garnered a tremendous amount of criticism. So why was it included, especially when it adversely affects people in certain cities, particularly our sailors at CFB Halifax and CFB Esquimalt?
Mr. Chair, this was all part of the negotiation with central agencies as to what we could get through and what we couldn't, and what was landed on. Now, that's not to say it's going to end at 7 years. 7 years is a long time away, and there will be a reassessment period that goes in over the next few years to look at the impact. But the sense is, after 7 years in one location, you're going to be established. You're going to be able to get into a more established lifestyle, more established accommodations, but reassessment will be required in a number of years.
So is it you or is it the Treasury Board?
So this is a negotiation between our staff and the Treasury Board.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so moving on. We've routinely heard that the recruitment process needs to be restructured and simplified, including from Justice Arbor. What is the status on that?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to report that our recruiting modernization team is making good progress. They are advancing on 3 lines of effort. The first is on attractions, getting more applicants into the door, and to sign up. Good news, I was just informed last week that our applicant numbers are above historic norms, and that's putting the new permanent resident policy aside. So there is some light that is showing. So the secret now, or the challenge now, is to convert those applicants to enrollment. And so that's the first one. Second line of effort is to streamline the recruiting process. This means getting a digital online portal to ease the process, to putting our Canadian Forces aptitude test unproctored online, to address a number of the systemic barriers that are in there, such as the security clearance. And the third line of effort is the medical requirements. Currently, right now, 70% of our applicants require a second level of medical review. It speaks to the medical challenges in our society, the mental health, the medication, et cetera. Many times, when we ask them to go back, we need a note from their family doctors or a specialist. So in our society, as you're well aware, there's a shortage of those types of clinicians. And so we're looking at innovative ways to deal with that challenge as well.
Okay,
at the same time,
we're unfortunately, Ms. Cramp-Newman's time is over with, okay. But I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to expand. Mr. Souza, you have 5 minutes.
I appreciate deliberations and so forth, and the difficulty at times comes to operating such a huge and substantive organization as you do. And when I look at the estimates, and I'm seeing that the increases that have occurred in regards to the operational pieces and the parts with now the uniqueness of some of the programs that are being put forward, do you have a concern as to where it stands right now?
The department as a whole? I'm just
in terms of the estimates, yeah.
No, Mr. Chair, the mains, generally speaking, year over year, as you've seen, 2% increase. We've talked about some of the challenges in terms of getting dollars out the door and moving projects along with our partners in the industry at the pace we would like. But do I have concern with the mains right now? The increase is understandable. I'm sure you will hear from us later on this year on supplementary estimates, but nothing to flag for the committee.
Specifically, I'm looking at some of the challenges encountered as a result of the transfer operation of UNIFOR training with Ukraine, the United States, and Poland. How is that training progressing? How is that proceeding?
So, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, you're asking how the training, our training of Ukrainian armed forces is proceeding?
Yeah, and how is it being put to use by the Ukrainian armed forces?
So, Mr. Chair, the training that we provide the Ukrainian armed forces is highly valued. I believe I talked to this committee after my trip to Ukraine 2 months ago. The commander of our Joint Operations Command just came back from meeting counterparts in Ukraine a week and a half ago, and we had the same message. The training that we are delivering is of incredible benefit. And so the training in the UK, as we train Ukrainian recruits, 5-week program of instruction continues to go very well. We're going to carry on with that for the rest of the year. As we speak, we've got 400, soon to be 800 Ukrainian recruits under instruction. Our training of engineers in Poland likewise goes extremely well. We've trained hundreds of Ukrainian sappers to deal with issues like mine clearance, obstacle removal, and the like. We have recently started the training of Ukrainian medical personnel in battlefield medicine, tactical combat casualty care. That is proving to be extremely successful, and they've asked us to do more. We are looking at opportunities to expand leadership training of Ukraine. One of the competitive advantages that the Armed Forces of Ukraine has is the quality of their leaders. Both at the NCO and officer level. They've really embraced what we call mission command, so the empowerment. But war is not kind on junior leaders, and junior leaders suffer a disproportionate number of casualties. So helping Ukraine and Ukrainian armed forces reconstitute that leadership cadre is an important allied effort as well. The training that we've done on the tanks that we've donated has been greatly appreciated. I'll share what I shared before, that this has been some of the most valuable experiences our own soldiers have had in terms of their own lives to train Ukrainians. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Germany and met with some of our members who are providing the organizational support for the sustainment and the training. And they likewise told me that this is the most meaningful thing they've done in their lives. And so, Mr. Chair, this continues to be a very, very valued endeavor and useful for the future of the rules-based international order.
In terms of the estimates, back to that, and the increases, I was concerned about the cyber capability, the increased support that you've been putting forward in respect to that, and particularly your ability to defend against that critical infrastructure cyber attacks. I mean, it's helping. I'm trying to understand if what we've done to provide estimates, to provide the support, is giving you what you need.
I think two things, and we should turn to our colleagues from CSE as they're the true experts here. But yes, defense has a cyber capability, and protecting our assets, and communications in an increasingly complex world is part of the core job. Lots of research going on in this area as well, but perhaps Caroline would wish to add something from a CSE perspective.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to say that Maine estimates did provide an injection of funds, in particular with regards to Operation Unifier. And that's in addition to the budget funding that was provided to us in 2022 to be able to proceed with foreign cyber operations and support what we need to do. And so we do have quite a bit in terms of the law that was modified in 2019 that provided us with foreign cyber operations to be able to do both defensive as well as active cyber operations. One of the things we do with Ukraine in particular is provide a lot of advice, cyber advice. We learn a lot from the war in Ukraine in terms of recognizing the threat to critical infrastructure. We had already stated this as part of our national cyber threat assessment that was done last fall. But in addition to what we're witnessing in the war in Ukraine, we have also been actively warning industry of the critical infrastructure sectors to be aware about the fact that they could be a possible threat to cyber attacks.
Okay, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Sorry about that. Madame Normandine, 2.5 minutes.
Une question en deux temps.
A two-tiered question. The General mentioned that they were difficult discussions with the Treasury Board to move from the housing differential to post-living differential. Could you please explain what the total envelope is distributed to members, even though it is distributed differently? It's less than what it was previously. As well, the members say that there is a retroactively salary increase of 10% for 4 years is insufficient. I would like you to understand how important it is to be attractive compared to the private sector in a labor shortage context.
Peut-être, Monsieur le Président, je vais commencer. Donc,
I'll respond. When we decide to update a policy, we have discussions with the central agencies, of course, but especially it is a data exchange. We developed a number of economic models to justify our options. And we also worked with our counterparts at Treasury Board in order to determine the best model for implementation. Regarding wages and wage increases, I cannot comment specifically as to what my counterparts at Treasury Board think about this issue. Well, I'd like to ask you directly. I'd like to ask the panel directly this question. That is, does 10% increase over 4 years, does that make the armed forces competitive to the private sector in a context of labor shortage? Mr. Chair, I would like to grant more than 10% wage increase to all Canadians, but that is not possible at this time.
Madam Matson, 2.5 minutes.
So I had talked before about the fact that as part of the budget, and then promises to PSAC strikers to come to a tentative deal. The government promised to cut outsourcing by 15%. Obviously, this is a huge issue to the union in terms of seeing a lot of their work being contracted out. And of course, this is a big deal to the government, as we see a lot of big contracts, big numbers going out to private corporations. So can you confirm that as part of this review, as part of this new deal going forward, that will actually also limit or put limitations on the salary wage envelope and those spending caps that limit the size of D&D, which ultimately forces those in command to do a lot of that outsourcing, but that ultimately costs a lot more money in the long run?
I think a couple of things here. Number one, the deal is pretty fresh, Mr. Chair, so we will certainly engage with the centre in terms of expectations on honouring the commitments that were made as part of that deal. You know, contracting out, outsourcing is always a hot topic when we meet with our union leadership. I would suggest that on the defence side, you know, our public service numbers are growing, and we use, you know, we make use of contracting dollars as well. So I would not see this as a case of the department having outsourced public sector work because we're a public sector employees' job because we have been in growth mode. I think there's a question of, you know, when you cannot find in a timely manner employees to fill gaps, how do you do that? And I think contracting is always a viable temporary fix. In terms of the last part of the question on the salary wage envelope, one can move money between salary and wages and other envelopes for consulting dollars. People don't necessarily understand how that is done. But I would tell you it is not a limiting factor. What is a limiting factor in many cases when I speak to base commanders is the availability of employees to do the work, and that tends to be why they drift that way. But it should not be a limiting factor in terms of those decisions.
Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I just want to go through much questions here really quickly. You got it? Okay, now they got it. So just I want to run through this pretty quick. On the Australian fighter jets, the old F-18s that we bought, how many of them have been put into operations? Have they been completely modernized?
I think I will pass that one to Mr. Crosby.
Mr. Chair, there's currently 12 jets in service. The 13th one and the last that we'll be modifying will be delivered this summer.
Okay, there's a total of 18 we bought, plus 7 for parts. Were we cannibalizing those 7 other jets to get these ones flying, or are we also pulling parts off those old 7 F-18s to go on our fleet?
Mr. Chair, the remaining aircraft will either be turned into parts that we can employ, and in some cases we may look at turning them into training aids.
Okay, thanks. Out of Montreal, we have an ammunition plant owned by General Dynamics, OTS. Can you confirm that the American government and American military contacted Canada to start building the 155 rounds for the M777 howitzers?
Contact with our allies and industry on ammunition because 155 is a hot commodity these days. And with our allies, we are working together to try and figure out the best way to maximize industry capability there. And
confirm that at the Montreal ammo plant that they can build the 155 rounds?
There's different variants there, and I see the Chief and Mr. Crosby both want to jump in, so go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Chair, I had the opportunity to visit that ammunition plant and also the one in Valleyfield here back in the fall. That plant produces the M107 variant, which has got a shorter range than what we would like them to produce, which is the M795 variant. Work is ongoing for that.
And I would add that we are in conversation with our colleagues in the U.S. to ensure that our investments and their investments are aligned. It is quite an integrated supply chain.
So can we build the leading edge technologies required on the ammo that is requested by the Americans, our NATO allies, and Ukraine?
Canadian industry can with some investment, and so that and you can view
investments reflected in the estimates.
You can view investment as long-term contracts or direct investment. So those discussions are underway, but we would like them to produce that ammunition, and we would like them to produce it quickly. Time is not our friend on this one. I think the other one I would flag for you, Mr. Chair, is keep watch for a future ideas challenge on ammunition, because the speed to scale up industry and replenishing ammunition stocks is something Canada and all of our allies are worried about.
We need the ammo now. It's getting burnt through pretty quick in the war in Ukraine. So in the budget, there was very little in here for Ukraine, especially from a defense standpoint. $200 million was in the budget for, I guess, paying national defense back for the 8 Leopard tanks that were already donated. How's that $200 million going to get used? Are we buying new tanks to replace the 8 we donated, or are we going to invest them back into the existing fleet? We can get the 70 or so other tanks up to operational capabilities that are right now sitting waiting for maintenance and overhaul.
So the money referenced in the budget was a catch-up adjustment because of the capital cost of those things that were donated. In terms of how to best ensure that the tank fleet is maintained, really interesting discussions happening with the manufacturers on spare parts. Spare parts and ability to access those is a real challenge, both for the tanks that we own, but also the ones that have been donated to Ukraine. And so those discussions are ongoing.
We have definitely learned from the war in Ukraine that it is a tank war. Is there any discussions around investing in a new fleet of tanks for our Canadian Armed Forces?
There are indeed discussions, and I'll turn to the Chief because he's an Army guy who can probably give you a better answer than I could.
So, Mr. Chair, many at the beginning of this second round of invasion of Ukraine said that the era of the tank was over. But I think it's instructive to see arguably the most successful and the most experienced army in conventional war in the 21st century asking for tanks. And so the era of the tank is not over. It's fundamental to close combat. It's fundamental to provide the shock action through firepower, maneuver, and protection. So yes, we need to continue to invest in this capability until there's something else that provides that shock action.
Thank you.
And Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you and your team for being here for the second hour. General Eyre, you may not remember this because it probably wasn't a highlight for you, but we had a conversation, you and I, during the Halifax International Security Forum with the NATO Supreme Commander. And we were talking about the incredible opportunity for Halifax with Diana, and he was there to announce it the day before with the minister. And we talked about Canada's contribution to NATO being the 6th largest of all NATO nations. And I think it speaks to Canada's place in NATO and its level of importance in NATO. And I remember the conversation being very positive, very, very pro-Canada. But I don't think many people, and maybe even some of the people on this committee, know much about Diana and what an opportunity it is and what exactly it is. So I thought maybe I would ask if you could describe it, if you feel that it's the Deputy Minister's spot to do so, but just a little bit about Diana, what it is, you know, what it says about Canada's place in NATO to be chosen for Diana, and I guess, you know, thinking about Nova Scotia a little bit, how important it is for Halifax to have Diana.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll say a few words and then turn it over to the Deputy Minister for the real answer. So I remember that conversation well. It was with Admiral Rob Bauer, who is the chair of the Military Committee for NATO. The importance of this speaks to the changes we see in the security environment. We're seeing technological acceleration like we haven't in the history of humans. And our adversaries are putting tremendous investments into these game-changing technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, hypersonics, quantum computing, human-machine interface. And so to remain competitive, and when I firmly believe Canada has a place to do this. To remain competitive, we have to stay abreast of these developments and be armed with the latest.
So a couple of points here, Mr. Chair. Number one, just to build on the Chief's answer, NATO leadership recognizes the need to maintain a technological advantage, and hence the Diana Initiative. There's a European headquarters to this, London or UK and Estonia. The North American headquarters will be in Halifax, although that still has to be officially blessed through NATO governance. And it really provides an opportunity for Canadian industry to step up and play a role in cutting-edge research. So the idea here is to engage industry in research, but also provide access to accelerators, test centers, and really engage the full power of both departmental scientists, NATO researchers, et cetera, with industry, with universities to make sure that cutting-edge technological advantage is maintained by the West and their allies. So more to come on this one, but it presents a really great opportunity for not just for Canada, but for Halifax in particular to be the center. But there will be benefits for all of Canada.
2 minutes. Okay. Oftentimes on this side of the room, we have a different perspective. I'm being kind, but a different perspective than what we might have from our Conservative colleagues. And Ms. Gallant talked about a reliance on the U.S. during the Chinese weather balloon. I see it a little bit differently, and I think the minister touched on it, but very, very quickly. It seems to me, and I'd be looking for your thoughts on this, it seems that it was exactly what NORAD was supposed to do, and that the cooperation between Canada and the United States was seamless. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and if you could describe to the committee that that's actually how it's supposed to work in this incredible and very important relationship that we have.
So, Mr. Chair, this unfolded exactly the way we train for it. We train often for cross-border use of each other's assets. And so as this incident unfolded, I was in close communication with Commander NORAD. I talked to the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We briefed the Prime Minister, and the decision-making process was, it validated the process that we have in place for making these decisions. So very, very happy the way it occurred.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And with that, I want to thank the General Eyre and Mr. Deputy Minister Matthews and your colleagues for your presence here today. It was very helpful. Before I adjourn, colleagues, we have votes. Shall the votes under the Department of National Defense, Communication Security Establishment, the Military Grievances External Review Committee, the Military Police Complaints Commission, and the Office of Intelligence Commissioner of the Main Estimates 2023 carry? Well, shall I report these votes to the House? Division, I should imagine. Okay? On division, yes. Okay. Well, all I was hearing was on silence. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, yes, yes, yeah. Silence is consent. Okay, with that, I think we have all the votes that we need on division or otherwise. So thank you for that, and again, thank you, colleagues, for your contribution. Meeting adjourned.